We're from North Dakota, where 12,000 workers bring electricity to 2 million customers and provide over $5 billion in economic activity to the state, while reclaiming 22,000 acres of land. This is coal country.
Find out more at lignite.com/podcast. The voice for North Dakota coal.
Love staying informed? Subscribe now and get unlimited access to local news, weather, and sports for just 99 cents a month for your first 3 months at inforum.news/join. Read every story, listen to every podcast, and download the apps that keep you informed and on the go 24 hours a day. So head to inforum.news/join right now to subscribe. What are you waiting for? Get 3 months of local news for just 99 cents a month at inforum.news/join.
You're listening to Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. I'm your host, Rob Port. If I sound distracted, it's because I've been busy covering this story all morning. I'm joined by my co-host, Chad Oban.
He's right of center, I'm left of center, both sides of the political spectrum.
I think it's cathartic. I think it's a necessary and proper debate. I'm glad we're having it.
And honestly, we have to do better.
Okay, I don't know why I'm getting blamed for this, right? Welcome to Plain Talk. Happy to be with you where we're still, I think there's still like 10. We were talking about it on the last episode, Chad. I think there's still like 10 bills that the governor, and I expect either today or Monday, we're probably going to get his decisions on those final 10 bills. So technically the legislative session isn't quite over yet, but we're getting there. And we wanted to talk a little bit and kind of do an end of session wrap up. There were some big debates during this session. Here to talk with us about some of those is Senate Majority Leader David Hogue, of course, Republican from Minot. Senator Hogue, how are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Good. Glad to be home. Not not stuck in Bismarck anymore.
Yeah. I'm actually, we were talking about the rain before we came on, and I'm just really, I'm as excited about it as most of the people in the West are, particularly those in the ag community. This has been, I don't know what you call it, $1 million rain is certainly one of those events. It's having a large impact on a lot of people in Western North Dakota for sure.
Were you a dummy like me and forget to turn your sprinklers off during it?
I don't. I live a couple of miles out in the country. I don't have sprinklers, but I did mow my lawn once, and it was like I was in the middle of a dust bowl for an hour as it was dusty in early May.
Yeah, and I want to go on the record and say I did turn off my sprinklers as to not waste our precious water resources, unlike Rob Port.
Yeah. Well, I didn't do it on purpose. I forgot that they were still on, and I woke up at 6 this morning to the sound of my sprinklers going off outside my window, and I'm thinking, you idiot. And that was totally not needed. So, Senator, I wanted to ask you, first of all, the big debate of this session, probably maybe the most high-profile piece of policy that came out was the property tax bill.
Sure.
And you were pretty central to the debate over that. And one thing that you were really adamant about was the skin in the game provision to ensure that, or I guess basically put a sort of cap on how much of the property tax credit people could receive. That ultimately wasn't a part of the final bill. How satisfied are you with what the legislature did ultimately?
Well, I'm extraordinarily satisfied. I couldn't be happier. If we, the skin in the game amendment that you reference is a pretty small piece of the overall package. It's potentially a $21 million fiscal impact, but you have to look at the bigger picture. And I think the bigger picture, both from this session and the last session, is that under Leader LaFour's leadership and mine, we passed over $950 million of sustainable income and property tax relief for the people in North Dakota, and that's the big picture. I've looked around what Texas has tried to do with the primary residence tax credit. What Minnesota did last session When they had a surplus, they don't have a surplus this session. So guess what? No tax relief. Montana, the same thing. They are trying some income tax relief, but nobody, whether you measured it on a per capita basis, whether you measure it on, a percentage of your surplus that you gave back to the taxpayer, nobody in the nation is doing what North Dakota is doing. And so I'm really proud of that. That's the big picture. The skin in the game was, that was one of probably 6 different levers or things that we were looking at to figure out how to deliver property tax relief. I think the biggest issue that probably went unreported was how many people are eligible for the primary residence tax credit and how many are going to claim it. And there was a big difference between the tax commissioner, the Senate, and the House about that number. Because the tax commissioner was stuck around 160,000 homes. And in the Senate, we were right around 144,000 homes. Well, if you do that math, that's 16,000 primary residence applications times 2 in a biennium. That's 32,000 homes times a $1,500 or $1,600 tax credit. Well, that's a $50 million item of difference that you're trying to factor into the amount of tax relief. And so that was probably the biggest one.
Do you feel like ultimately we got that math right?
I don't because there's so many unknowns that we don't know about. We know we have approximately 16,000 mobile homes out there. We don't know how many of them are actually applying for the credit. But based on what we did on the $500 tax credit, we think it's a pretty small number because the amount of credit that they would actually get is in that $200 to $400 range. And so I, at the end of the session, thought maybe we should set some additional dollars aside for the tax commissioner because we think we're going to be a little low, but I think the prevailing sentiment was that the tax commissioner will ask for a deficiency appropriation. And by the time we come into the 2027 session, we'll have a better feel what that number is going to be. But the reporting is that it was $407 million worth of tax relief. I think it's going to be closer to $440 million.
Senator, what were your thoughts? I mean, when the bill went over to the House, your fellow Minot Republican, Scott Lauser, stood up and talked about how he supported the bill, but then also sort of announced a constitutional measure on property taxes as your former colleague Rick Becker was up in the crowd videotaping him. I mean, the yes on Measure 4 crowd is still out there saying not enough was done, not enough was done. What's your take on all this? I mean, do you think they're going to try another measure? I mean, I can't imagine there's going to be enough wind behind them to, I mean, if I'm getting $1,600 off of my property taxes, I'm a little less angry about my property taxes a year from now than I am today.
Yeah, well, I think that's a good point. And I like to say, and maybe it's a little bit, I like to say I try to pay attention to the people who are in the arena with me trying to formulate policy and not those, the Monday morning quarterbacks are always going to be there. But the reality is we have 53 counties and Measure 4 failed in all 53 of those counties. And so, when people talk about, well, this is what the people want, who are the people? Because certainly when they were given the opportunity to abolish property taxes, they said no, and it was pretty overwhelming. So, I try to focus on what makes sense and what is affordable and sustainable so that the next legislature does not have to sort of take back what they've previously provided. And so I just try to stay focused on that. You're always going to have that element of the Monday morning quarterbacks that always think you can do better. But I try to remind my caucus at least that they are the loud minority that it has access to social media and other things to really project a voice that doesn't represent the majority.
I think that's been one of the great challenges of policy making in this era is the degree to which social media can act, social media and perhaps other media can act as a distortion field for the public, where a lot of time, I mean, sometimes people get a lot of traction on social media and they can turn that into real impact politically. They get people out at endorsing conventions, or they get people out at the ballot box. Sometimes that can happen, but sometimes it can't. And sometimes it can be hard to tell what's a genuine movement and what's not. I think your analysis of the Measure 4 folks is correct. Even back, this last cycle, before we had done anything on property tax relief, and I would say that public angst with property taxes was high, they still didn't do very well at the ballot. Now we have, there's a lot of North Dakotans who are going to be receiving a substantial amount of property tax relief. That is going to change the political calculus and not in their favor. So,
Right.
I think your analysis of that is correct. Another big thing that is right at the end of the session, a big fight over campaign finance reform. And this, of course, is something near and dear to my heart, as I love reading campaign finance disclosures. But big differences between obviously a majority in the House and the Senate on, what lawmakers in particular should be reporting. The Senate's position essentially is that legislators, like other, like statewide candidates, for instance, should be itemizing, campaign expenditures. It should be reporting beginning and ending fund balances. Were you surprised at how because when it all started with Senator Sean Cleary's bill, and obviously it took a very, very convoluted path through the legislature. But, when I first read it, I didn't think it was that controversial, and it got very heated at the end. Did that surprise you?
It did surprise me because, it's one of those little, I don't want to call it a sleepy little issue, but it wasn't particularly on my radar as things we needed to resolve to get the session wound down and get us on the road to, or at least getting us able to hear the gavel sine die is out. And I was very surprised. And so I think part of it was that I didn't have a great realization that how dug in both sides were, the conferees on both sides, and wanting, seeing it as a great philosophical divide, which there often are divides between the House and Senate that I think sometimes the public doesn't necessarily appreciate. But yeah, I was surprised.
Senator, one thing that the state has been facing for, it seems like decades, is workforce issues. You and Representative LaFleur had an op-ed about the accomplishments of the session. I got to be honest, the piece on workforce seemed a little thin. Can you talk about what the legislature did in terms of workforce and getting more folks into the jobs and filling the positions we need to fill in the state?
Well, okay, happy to do so. One of the things that I hope that will take off is we offered an employer child care tax credit. Hate to use the term skin in the game there, but I will. It's nice.
Careful, that's a phrase that you can never use again.
I almost like getting a dirty word by the end of the session.
No, but I mean, how do you incent employers to participate in sharing some of the cost of childcare, which we know is a huge barrier to getting people into the workforce, particularly for entry-level positions, the retail, restaurants, lodging. We know those people tend to stay out of that workforce because of the lack of affordability of childcare. So one of the things we did is we passed a credit that I think will be, useful to the large employers because they're the ones that will pay state income tax. And so I'm hopeful that will catch on and people will say, hey, here's a way for me to help myself through a tax credit and also help my employees that they're looking at their take-home pay and how much goes to childcare, and they're really questioning how can they make that work? So that would be an example of something that we did to improve on the affordability of childcare and getting people into the workforce.
Do you think that some of it, because the workforce issues, we've been debating them for decades, and we've tried a lot of things, over the years. And I mean, I got the sense kind of, and I shared Chad, like I'm a little underwhelmed, but I think I'm also a little sympathetic too, because I'm thinking it's hard to know what else to try at this point. I mean, I don't know. I'm kind of at a loss. I don't know how to solve it either. I don't know how to make people want to move to North Dakota and live in North Dakota. And I say that, like, I love North Dakota, but that's been a major challenge, is how to get available. We've tried everything, higher ed, trying to incentivize students to stay, trying to incentivize workers to move here. I mean, short of just cutting people checks to move to North Dakota, do you feel like we're kind of scraping the bottom of the barrel for ideas?
Well, no, I don't. I guess what you mentioned, okay, higher education. I've kind of changed my thinking on that over the years, because we know we subsidize every student from out of state that comes to our out of state universities. We subsidize every one of them, and by a significant margin. And so, but I've come to realize that actually works. It's money well spent when you are able to get a young student from Minnesota that comes either to, primarily NDSU and UND. They get a chance to be on campus and to develop an educational career. The probability that they're going to stay in North Dakota increases dramatically, because we know, the people that do come here to stay, they're either come here because of a job, because they're going to school, or because they have some, familial relationship that draws them here. And that's to me what we have to focus on: education, existing jobs, and those family relationships. And that's what we should be leveraging. And when we find something that doesn't work, as an example, the Find the Good Life program that was inside of Commerce, the North Dakota Senate, we didn't just reduce the funding for that. We eliminated that because we thought that the program isn't working because it's based on a faulty assumption that you'll be watching your TV one day and you'll see an ad and you'll want to move to North Dakota. We know that's not good policy.
I'm sorry, just a quick follow up. And I didn't mean to interrupt you there, but my thinking about, sort of bringing in, incentivizing out of state students to move to here, North Dakota, to get their education and hopefully put down some roots and stay. But one complicating factor is kind of the move towards distance education. Are you worried? I mean, because that whole premise is assumed that we're going to get them on a campus in North Dakota, but we're very much moving towards distance education, and we're seeing a lot of distance education where North Dakota taxpayers are kind of paying for distance education for people in other states. And that worries me a little bit, because we don't have, in those instances, we don't have the incentive where we're bringing them physically to North Dakota to put down roots. Does that part of it worry you at all?
I absolutely agree 100%. And that's why we're changing that formula. Because if under the higher education funding formula, we were incenting institutions to get students and get them to earn credit hours, and that's how they received revenue. And we're gonna revise that, because we absolutely do not want to subsidize remote education students that have no likelihood of coming to North Dakota. And so we have an interim study that's going to look at that and change the formula to say, not only is it, we want to reward the universities that actually bring students inside the state of North Dakota. They can still do their distance education, but they're not going to be economically rewarded the way the so-called butts in the seat students are.
Senator, staying on education, Rob got to talk about campaign finance as being very close to his heart, so now I'm going to talk about K through 12 education. Again, looking at your op-ed, it referenced this session was about results, not rhetoric. And then when talking about education, the first line was, we increased teacher pay.
Yep.
And then at the end of it, it said, to support educators, we introduced signing bonuses for new teachers, House Bill 1498. That was already in code. All you did was change the way, like it cleaned up language, and then also modernize the process for a lifetime teacher license. So my question for you, we just saw reports that we're continuing to go down in the national rankings of teacher salary. You said you raised teacher salaries. What did the North Dakota legislature do to raise teacher salaries?
Well, we increased, we had a debate about that, Chad. We increased the per pupil funding, 2.5%. And, that was, I will say that involved a lot of, back channel debate because, we weren't raising providers, the people that provide, support to the people who are not able to take care of themselves in the Health and Human Services budget. We weren't giving them a 2.5% increases, but we were doing that for teachers through the per pupil funding increase. So,
but you understand that the 2.5% is below inflation, and also all that money doesn't go to teachers. That goes to the district to pay for health insurance and all the other rising costs as well. So to say they're getting 2.5% is exactly accurate.
Well, I get that, but it's more than we gave other providers. And so I think that's a reasonable assertion to say that when you raise the per pupil, you are signaling that you'd like to see teachers. We realize that's a local decision, but we certainly put the dollars in there that if a school board was so inclined, they could raise student or teacher pay 2.5% as well.
How likely are we? We're certainly seeing a lot at the federal level. We've recently had Congresswoman Julie Fedorchak on, talking about, the work they're trying to do. And she's pretty adamant that, and I agree with her that we've got to right size the federal government, but that's going to mean cutting some spending, and we can have a debate about what's good spending and what's not spending. And we're probably going to have 3 different point of views depending on what it is.
Right.
But I mean, obviously, if some of that federal money, and we saw it already, where we saw some FEMA money dry up for some water/sewage projects around the state, is the legislature anticipating more? How likely is it, do you think, that we end up with a special session sometime in the next 2 years before the next session to come in and address, changes that the federal government's making to North Dakota's cut of federal spending?
Well, I think the probability is moderate to low that we would come into a special session to address federal funding cuts. What has got my attention is, the major piece of change that you're seeing at the federal level, at least what's being talked about in the national media, is changing the eligibility requirements for Medicaid recipients, and I think it involves them having to, apply for work and other eligibility criterias. I don't think that would have a big impact in North Dakota. That's why I say even if they pass something like that, I don't think we would call ourselves into session to deal with that rather than wait for the next session. But if there were some major losses, there, like I've said before, there are 4 or 5 different scenarios where we would call ourselves into session. One of them that I pointed out was, if the Eighth Circuit decided to reverse the lower court, which they did a couple days ago. I mean, I'm receiving calls to do that, but I don't know about that one. The second would be a catastrophic decline in the price or production of oil and natural gas, because that would throw our budget projections way out. The third is, federal reductions, like we saw with the Lincoln sewage lagoon, the one in Pheasanton, and I think the one in Washburn. So I was happy that they announced that withdrawal of funding so that we could respond to those.
So, Senator, as Rob mentioned at the beginning of this, the governor still does have 10 budget bills or so that he could do some line item vetoing. I mean, is there if he line item vetoes, do you have the ability to come back and try to override those vetoes? And do you think, how significant would the vetoes have to be for you guys to want to come back to override them? Or do you come back regardless to try to override them?
That's a good question, Chad. It does fall on, what is the significance of the veto? One of the great powers that the governor has is that so-called line item veto, meaning that he can look at a budget, and it could be a budget as large as the Department of Health and Human Service, right? $5.5 billion. And he can say, well, I'm not going to veto the entire budget and create that severe of a veto, but I can go in and say I don't like this particular line of spending, and he can do that. And with any given budget, there are 15 or 20 different discretionary spending items that he can veto, and I suspect he will want to veto some because I know most of the budgets the legislature is working with the Department of OMB on those budgets. But if there's something the governor doesn't like, yeah, he has that prerogative, and I suspect we will see one or two of those. But a particular line item is not going to cause us to come into session.
But you and Representative LaFleur would sit down and just sort of make that determination.
We would.
So is it made by the leaders then? You and your counterpart in the House make a decision for the whole chamber, or how does that work?
It's up to the legislative management, which is 17 members, of which Leader LaFleur and I are 2 members, make the decision on whether to come into special session. And, it's one of those things where you do the analysis, how significant is it? Is it something that, even if it's broke, can it not wait until January of 2027? And so that's the sort of the analysis we go through. But there's not many things that are of that significance that we're gonna come back into session to fix.
Right, and you want to make sure you have the votes to override it. You don't want to come back just for the sake of coming back.
Yeah, no, that's a really bad look for the legislature.
Yeah.
Where we say we're coming back to override the governor's veto
and then fail.
Votes.
You better whip that vote if you're going to do it.
No.
You better have the whip count in correctly. Do you anticipate any vetoes at this point, or it's kind of a guessing game? I mean, the only person who knows is the governor and his staff. But any that stick out to you that might be drawing his eye?
I wouldn't want to comment on that. That's, like I said, that's the governor's prerogative. It's something that's accorded to him under the Constitution, and I don't want to be casting any stones at this point.
Any other victories or accomplishments that you want to highlight that took place this session? I mean, it seems like the Jamestown State Hospital is a big deal. The governor's been touting the cell phone ban. I'm really interested in how that implementation is going to work. But anything else that you want to sort of point to as accomplishments from this legislature?
Yeah, well, thanks, Chad. You highlighted a couple. I would point out one other one, which was part of the again, not widely reported on the property tax reform and relief debate, is, our rural legislators were interested in seeing more funding for rural infrastructure, but they were also interested in seeing that funding source be something that isn't flat and static like our gasoline tax. And so in addition to using the legacy fund earnings to fund the primary residence tax credit, we also tied 2% of those legacy fund earnings to go into the DOT budget, and specifically to fund rural infrastructure, county roads, bridges. And so that, I think, represents a significant win for the rural parts of our state who are under the belief that we're not adequately funding rural infrastructure. And in order to do so, we need a source of revenue that has the ability to grow over biennia.
And that's really interesting. And it's probably it's a part of it. It's not a sexy part of the legislative debates that happen, but it's a necessary one when you think how vital, some of those long back, dirt roads maybe don't get a lot of traffic, but when you think about the commerce that they bring, the crops that they're bringing to market, or the industry that's back there servicing oil wells or what have you, it's pretty important. Not to mention, obviously, the people who live out there who deserve good roads and all that as well. Senator Hogue, thank you so much for your time. Really appreciate you coming on.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Thanks, Senator.
We're from North Dakota, where 12,000 workers bring electricity to 2 million customers and provide over $5 billion in economic activity to the state, while reclaiming 22,000 acres of land. This is coal country.
Find out more at lignite.com/podcast. The voice for North Dakota coal.
Hey friends, we've got a new way for you to participate in the show. You can now call us or text us with your questions, comments, or anything you want us to discuss on Plain Talk. Just give us a call or shoot us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. It's super easy. Leave your message, tell us your name and where you're from, and we might feature it on an upcoming episode.
Thanks for listening to Plain Talk. Now let's get back to today's episode.
Welcome back. Just finished up with Senator Hogue. Yeah, I don't anticipate a special session. I don't know that, because that's a big expense. I mean, to call everybody back into Bismarck, it would have to be something pretty provocative, pretty big that he did.
Yeah. So a couple of thoughts that I have after the interviews. One, I think it's always interesting to talk to legislators after they've been out of the Capitol for a week, 2 weeks, something like that. It seems like his sort of perspective on the property tax fight is maybe a little bit more grounded than it was during the session. I mean, during the session, these guys are ready to fight about, little things in the bill, but now he's kept coming out. He's really proud of what they accomplished, and I think they did accomplish something significant.
That could be posturing, though. I think sometimes it becomes a negotiating position where you just say, I'm going to lock in. I'm not budging off this. This is the most important thing ever. And some of that's tactics.
I think some of it's psychological, though. Some of it is being in the Capitol and living and breathing this stuff every
down
day.
In the weed.
It's so important. Every win is so important.
Little grains of sand start looking like boulders. Yeah.
Right. I also will say I hate the post-session op-ed where legislative leaders go through all the things they accomplished, because I could go through that whole op-ed and pick out how insignificant many of these bills were in actual practicality in the areas where I followed very closely. I mean, they have to do it, whatever, it's part of the game, but there is so much spin. At the end of the day, the things they accomplished this session are property taxes, the cell phone ban, funding the state hospital, and then some other sort of smaller things. If I were them, I would ignore everything else and just lean into property taxes. That's what they accomplished this session.
Yeah, both parties. I mean, the minority party puts out, and there's some exaggerating and spin going on there too. It's what they do. I really, and I haven't thought about that, but that 2% for rural infrastructure that he referenced, that did fly under my radar.
Right.
That does seem like a pretty significant, I don't know what you want to call it, shift or development. I feel like that's going to have a positive impact. I was very happy the way he described it, happy to hear about it. Glad it happened. Looking forward to seeing how it works out. But that's one of those things that, again, it ain't sexy, but it's important.
Yeah. Right. And we'll see. I mean, rural North Dakota needs everything they can get right now. The other thing that I thought was interesting is, saying we probably won't come back because of federal cuts. But even if that's the case, I think when we look at next session, these federal cuts that we're talking about, a lot of that is they're talking about cutting the SNAP program because the state should take care of more of it. We're going to, slow down the growth or cut Medicaid because the state can take care more of it. When the feds are making the decision to make cuts and that the state is going to have to pay for it, what does that look like as the stuff rolls downhill? And I think it's something that North Dakota appropriators are going to have to figure out in the next couple of years. I mean, they're going to have to make the decision. Do they want to continue to provide these services? And a lot of them are to the most vulnerable. But I think it's going to be an issue in the coming sessions as these cuts go through.
It does. And I don't even necessarily know that it's a negative thing, though. I really think that, again, this is probably my conservative / federalist. I like the idea of shifting the responsibility of more of this stuff back to the states. And again, I mean, the federal government has got to downsize its budget, and we've also got to price government appropriately. So we need to decide: do we want to have these programs? In which case, we probably have to raise taxes or figure out a way to pay for them. Or if we don't, we got to get rid of the programs. And depending on what we're talking about, we're going to have a rollicking debate about. But you're right. That is going to be an important part of the next, I would say, several sessions, depending on how much progress gets done. Because the other thing that could happen is the way Trump is handling all this stuff. And we talked about that during the Julie Fedorchak interview. And she did call me afterwards, and she wanted to make it very clear that, she supports Trump's agenda. I took what she said and I wrote about it as, the way it's being handled and the way some of these cuts are very abrupt could have political consequence. She says she's not worried about that. And I don't want to, it's not my place to put words in her mouth, but I do think there's a real risk in the Elon Musk stuff and people just getting tired of it, particularly when the rubber starts meeting the road and their businesses are affected, their families are affected, their personal lives, their commute to work is affected, all the different ways that this spending touches them. If it hurts them, this could backlash, and maybe none of these cuts actually come to fruition because Republicans bungled it.
There was just a Minot Daily editorial talking about, these cuts are hitting really close to home, and they seem like a number on a piece of paper in Washington, but in Minot, they're affecting real services for real people. And that's, I think, the problem that Fedorchak and these folks are going to have. The other thing is, she was confident they're going to get something done because they have to pass it. I mean, that's a big tent that the Republicans have in Washington, and they have to get every one of them.
And they don't have a lot of, and given the way, how hyper partisan things are, you don't have a lot of Democrats who have a lot of incentive to help out. I think that's unfortunate. I think Republicans have done it, and Republicans and Democrats have done it to themselves. I wish it was otherwise, where we could find deals and work across party lines, but that's just not the game we're playing right now.
But I think Medicaid is a perfect example. I mean, the way that Fedorchak talked about this, I was going to say spun it, but that has a negative, that it's not cuts. But then you have the moderate Republicans who are saying it is cuts, and this is going to affect our chances of victory. And then you got the ultra conservatives who are saying it's not cuts, and we actually do need to make cuts. To get all three of those sort of groups together, and you can only lose 2 or 3 votes in the House, that's tough, man. That's real tough.
And who knows what's going to happen in the midterms. I don't think this is going to be a good midterm cycle for Republicans. I think they're probably going to lose the House. Well, but we'll see. We're so far out. It's hard.
And again, I think to Fedorchak's point, this is their shot, right? The Republicans have the trifecta in Washington. If they're not going to do some of these things they've been talking about for decades now, when are they going to do it?
Yeah. Well, that's a fair point. So, but at the state level, we do need to be prepared. And to be honest with you, I welcome that. It's going to be hard. We're going to have to make some hard choices. But the thing is, when you're $37 trillion in debt at the national level, we're going to have to make some hard choices. And so I welcome that debate. It's not going to be fun, but I welcome it.
But as long as our state legislature does not have their head in the sand and know that we're going to have these tough discussions, I think it's fine to have them. Frankly, I'd rather have them happen in Washington because they might have a bigger heart for some of the programs I like than our North Dakota legislature. But, as long as we understand the scope of the issue and what this means for North Dakota's budget, I don't know if I welcome it like you do, but I think we can have it.
Well, something had to give. We couldn't continue to just run budget deficit after budget deficit Something had to happen.
Maybe we should stop cutting taxes on billionaires. But anyway, that's a conversation for another day.
I'm open to the idea of raising taxes. I mean, the thing is, if we're gonna have government this big, that's got to be part. It can't be the only part of it, though. I reject the either or. It needs to be both. There are some people in this country that could definitely be paying more in taxes.
Well, and I think you and I have talked about it. When you're looking at a budget situation, you can't just look at the spending. You have to look at the revenue and the spending. And I think both sides need to recognize that, right? You can't just tax your way out of it, but you also probably can't just cut your way out of it either.
No.
And there doesn't seem to be a lot of overlap.
Well, and you can't cut yourself out, not with what Americans have come to expect from their government, too. I mean, that's the political reality.
Well, and I think, Rob, that's a good point. I mean, when Julie is saying that the federal government's gotten too big and it's gotten out of its lane in terms of what it's supposed to be providing, but if Americans are used to getting this from their federal government, that's a difficult thing to pull back now that they're used to it.
Definitely. Let's see, the other big news. So I've been getting beat up a little bit. I wrote a story last night about Jesse Burgum. And the reason that this ended up getting on my radar is that I wrote a story because I think it's cool when North Dakotans like go do like I think like Josh Duhamel, Darren Erstad. I'm always proud. Like I love the Rough Rider. I love hearing about the recent story about the genetic coding breakthrough that happened in Fargo. That like saved a baby's life and this is massive at Aldevron. That's Michael Chambers. I mean, that's a Fargo-based business. That's huge. I'm proud of. So when I heard that Jesse Burgum has, a production company, her production company is working with like Scarlett Johansson and everything, and I just think that's cool. So I wrote about it, and there was a part in there where they were very adamant that Doug Burgum was not involved. Like they were, Jesse Burgum herself kind of saying, well, this is something obviously I have some connections, but, basically I got some advice and then I had to cold call people to get money. And then her partner says, there was this hot rumor in Hollywood that it was all her dad's money and it wasn't. And that was really unfair to her and all this stuff. So I remember writing all that in that original column. And I remember thinking, well, this is just a really cool story of somebody who's going out. And it never would have bothered me if it had been like, yeah, my dad invested some money to get us started or whatever. That doesn't bother me. I'd do that for my daughter. Right. Right. If I had that kind of money.
If you can't get your rich dad to believe in what you're doing, who the hell are you going to get to believe in what
I don't have a problem with that at all. Parents help their kids. That's great. I'm if you're in a position to do it, great. But the thing is they made it very clear that wasn't happening. And then we get Doug Burgum's financial disclosures, and it turns out it is happening. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to write about that because that kind of stinks to say that. We're doing all this, and I'm getting beat up about it, where people are saying, oh, you're just picky. She's out there trying to do something great and you're being mean, and what dad wouldn't help his daughter. And I just like the point I want to make is not that he helped his daughter. That's not the issue. The issue is that they claimed Jesse Burgum and her partners claimed that he didn't help. And that's her in the financial disclosures. That's not true.
And them painting themselves, both she and her business partner, at it's sort of a pulled ourselves up by the bootstraps, and we did this on our own. So other than the tens of millions of dollars you got from your dad, let
me read some of the quotes. So this is from a September 2024 interview with the Hollywood Reporter, and so this is Jesse Burgum talking. She says, I quote, "I always say that Pinky Promise, that's the name of her production company, Pinky Promise Films. I always say that Pinky Promise is the result of what happens when an actress grows up in a household full of business people, because it really is the intersection of those things. There's a lot of stuff that you just pick up around the dinner table that I think you wouldn't necessarily know based on my resume or schooling, which is a degree in classical acting," she continued. So I've certainly learned a lot from them, and definitely through relationships and their past experience, I was able to get an email address, but then it was like, okay, good luck. And I started cold emailing people. And then this is what her partner, Kara Durrett, said. She said, I quote, "There was a rumor for 5 seconds in the industry when we first started 4 or 5 years ago, where people would think it's Jesse's dad's money. Her dad is not an investor in the company. Jesse spent months building a business plan and building an actual structure and a model that makes sense. In the beginning, I used to get very protective as a friend. Like, how dare you doubt what she did? Now it's actually quite fun for me to see other people realize that they just fully underestimated a woman who went out and raised this much money on her own. According to the financial disclosures, Doug Burgum made a personal loan to Pinky Promise LLC valued between $1 million and $5 million. The report, and by the way, those reports, they always report ranges. A lot of times they don't report. It's kind of annoying. But yeah, so a personal loan between $1 million and $5 million. The report also shows investments in Honk for Jesus of LLC of less than $1,000, an investment in I Don't Understand You LLC between $100,000 and $250,000, as well as revenues from If You LLC and Starling LLC of $77,000 and $33,000 respectively. Those are all films made by Pinky Promise. So
Again, this should not come as a surprise that Doug Burgum invested in his daughter's dreams. The problem is
that's a beautiful thing and a positive thing.
Yes. The problem is not even Jesse's quote as much as the business partner's quote saying, she did this all on her own. It's offensive that anybody would suggest. I think Jesse probably picked up some things at the dinner table, advice from her parents, but she also sounds like she picked up a check at the dinner table as well from her dad to get this thing going. So again, I think the frustration here is there are people who literally pulled themselves up by the bootstraps, and it's a great story. I don't think there's any benefit to Pinky Promise LLC to not be honest that Governor Burgum supported them. He's a smart businessman. I would think having somebody like Doug Burgum as an investor in your company, a smart move.
I suspect Jesse Burgum probably did learn a lot from her dad and her other relatives who are also
probably her mom too.
Right. Also very successful business people. She has a family full of successful business people around her. It would shock me that she didn't learn a thing or two from that and that it served her well in this business. She's also got some investments, clearly from her dad, maybe others, I don't know. And good for you. But also tell the truth about it. And if it's hanging out there, I don't know, people are going to beat me up. And that's the other thing about this is how hypocritical everybody is about this stuff, where because Doug Burgum is a Republican, you're going to have the people out there saying, well, it's how dare you do this? And then, but if it was Hunter Biden, they'd be singing a different tune, because that's how we see everything. I mean, everything is a political Rorschach test where your feelings about it are not based on the independent facts, but on the political affiliations. And that's it.
I think we should all embrace the idea of parents supporting their children's dreams and loving them. That is something that should be a bipartisan sort of thing. Yeah. I hope that Jesse Burgum does great things and is very successful in her career.
I hope
we were honest about the investors moving forward.
Right. I mean, and the thing is I don't even care. You don't have to disclose anything about your private company. You don't have to disclose anything if you don't want to, but don't go out and say, I did it on my own. I pulled myself up by the bootstraps. I was just cold emailing people and getting funding, and have your partner. And by the way, the partner said those things in the same interview. So they were like sitting next to each other.
Right.
And she didn't correct her while she's saying all that stuff. So don't do that. That's just dishonest.
Yeah. Hey, speaking of dishonest, there's a chance Pete Rose is going to make it into the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame.
And Shoeless Joe Jackson, which, listen, I get Shoeless Joe Jackson and the rest of the Black Sox through a World Series, and that's good. He absolutely did it. But I also watched 8 Men Out when I was a little boy, and I watched Field of Dreams and everything. So Shoeless Joe,
let him in,
is a romantic figure in my life. This is one thing where I'm allowed in every other part of my life. I try to be objective when it comes to politics. So when I'm writing about things, if it's somebody doing something crappy, I don't care what their political affiliations are. I'm going to write about it. But when it comes to baseball, though, I am hopelessly compromised. And so I'm glad that Shoeless Joe Jackson is finally getting into the Hall of Fame.
But how about Pete Rose?
Pete Rose is I think he belongs in the Hall of Fame. And the thing is, you could go, he gambled, he lied about it. There's been some other things revealed about his character. He was a philanderer. He
kind of an icky dude.
But the thing is, we have a lot of icky dudes in the Hall of Fame. It's really hard to sort of pull out a moral litmus test. I'm a big believer in Pete Rose is one of the greatest players to ever play the game. No question
Right.
about it. And the thing is, you put him in, warts and all. You put Babe Ruth in. Babe Ruth was also a boozing, philandering guy. Literally the best baseball player to ever live.
Ty Cobb was a known jerk.
Yeah, Ty Cobb was a racist.
Yeah.
Flat out. But again, one of the greatest to ever play the game. So, put him in. But the thing is in their biographies, be honest about who they were. These are people with warts. Not all of them were perfect people.
All right, Rob, now you've taken care of the easy ones.
Okay.
So you also were telling me about a video, an AI generated fake video.
It's a fake video.
Barry Bonds was making a case, and you said you are opposed to Barry Bonds being in the Hall of Fame. And I got to tell you, I've evolved a little bit on this. I used to be absolutely not, but now I'm convinced everybody during that era was using steroids. So therefore, if everybody's using steroids and you're still the greatest player of your generation, you should be in.
Think so? Not everybody was. Derek Jeter wasn't. Not everybody was. It's really hard. The difference, I draw a distinction because gambling was not performance enhancing, right? I guess you could argue. I mean, if anything, maybe he would have thrown some games. If anything, he would have hurt his case. So the thing about a PED is that it's performance enhancing. You're breaking the rule and giving yourself an on the field advantage that other players don't have.
Barry Bonds is going to be a Hall of Famer with or without the PEDs.
That's true. But he did take the PEDs. And
so how do you handle Clemens? How do you handle all these different folks? And there's got to be people in the hall.
Clemens is even hard because Clemens, the case for Clemens taking PEDs, the last time I looked at it, it's pretty loose. Right. It's hard. I think he probably did. But the problem is you've got to now it's like we're a judge and jury. We got to examine the evidence, and it gets really hard. I am kind of a PED absolutist, and I'd say that. There's some great Yankees: Roger Clemens, Alex Rodriguez, who would probably go in as a Yankee.
Right.
It's hard. It's really hard.
And those three guys we just mentioned, Bonds, Rodriguez, Clemens, all three of those guys I think make the Hall without PEDs.
Yeah.
All three were great players before their head sizes exploded.
Right. You have to wonder if the thing that's really hard is how much longer does Barry Bonds' career go on? Right. Because there's some records too. He's the all-time home run leader, if you count them all, but how many of those at end of the career home runs do we count?
But man, you still have to hit the 95-mile-an-hour fastball. It might go a little bit further.
Right.
But is it?
It's hard for me. So in my mind, Aaron Judge is the single season home run record leader because he, unlike Sammy Sosa or Mark McGwire or Barry Bonds, never a hint that he's been using PEDs.
Right.
That dude's just a freak that's just genetics.
Right.
That dude's just a freak of nature.
Well, isn't that a performance enhancing drug? His genetics are so much better. This 6'8".
Not if you're born with it. It's not like you stick a needle in his ass.
Watch your language.
Okay. So I don't know. But that is the distinction I draw between the two. If you're going to make the argument against Pete Rose didn't hit more hits because he was gambling. He didn't win more games or score more runs because he was gambling. Shoeless Joe Jackson didn't have a higher batting average because he threw a World Series. If anything, and really Shoeless Joe also didn't, he performed great in that World Series. He kind of screwed over the gamblers.
Right. I think Rose and Shoeless Joe are no-brainers. I think the PED era is really the more complicated one because I think your distinction is a good distinction between on the field and off the field sort of things. I just struggle as we learn more that it was so prevalent in baseball during that time. If everybody or close to everybody is doing it.
Well, also it's hard to how much damage that did to the game because really the league has culpability for that because they knew and they looked away. Because it was after that. Especially it was after that ugly strike
Yep.
really hurt baseball. And then all of a sudden, Mark McGwire and Sammy Sosa are coming out of the gates and they're smacking dingers. I remember how much fun that was.
I literally have talked to people who had swore off baseball during that strike, and Sosa and McGwire brought him back, and now they, live and die.
And that was the era where I really, really I'd always kind of liked baseball, but I hadn't really sat and watched a lot of games. And it was those 90s era Yankees teams during that time,
Right.
which I'm glad to say. I mean, you look at those teams, they weren't, that 98 team, they didn't really have a bruiser home run. When you think of all the home runs that were getting hit, and it's like Darryl Strawberry was their home run leader.
There is something about cheering for a juggernaut. There's something that really will bring you in. I guarantee my son's going to be a Dodgers fan for life because he is watching a very, very good team.
Well, and the cool thing is that the Yankees have kind of a forever juggernaut, but they were
Right.
coming into some pretty dark
Yep.
years. So they weren't really a juggernaut. And then all of a sudden they hit on and they won all those championships too. Not with big free agent signings. It was that
People they brought up.
They brought in some key, like Paul O'Neill, was a signing and stuff like that, but he wasn't a big A-Rod signing. Anyway, I'm going off on, but that era is central to my love of the game. And I look at the players who made it good. Bernie Williams, the pitchers, Andy Pettit, although he late in his career had a run-in with performance enhancing drugs, which I think frankly should keep. He's a borderline guy to begin with.
To start out with, yeah.
And yet in the PEDs, I just don't think he belongs there. But
yeah. But we can talk about Jeter. Jeter had 3,000 hits. He didn't use PEDs. He probably was never one of the best players. He was always good, right? On a championship team.
Jeter's greatness was longevity. He was
right.
The field and just he was just a ball player. He was just had his nose for the ball.
But if he was playing for the Marlins, he would not be in the Hall of Fame right now.
You don't think so? Not with 3,000 hits?
Yeah, well, I suppose the 3,000 hits. By the way, I think Freddie Freeman's going to get 3,000 hits. I was just reading an article, and that seems like almost a bygone era of people getting 3,000 hits.
Well, if we could flash to the present, how about Aaron Judge hitting home runs at the rate he's hitting home runs and batting over 400?
Yeah.
His on-base percentage is over 500. This is like when you look up and you see what Ty Cobb was doing in 16. And it's you're looking at the on-base percentage, that's absurd. And now Judge is doing it in 2025 against pitchers who are literally scientists now with the pitch shaping and all of that stuff that they're doing. And this guy is he's the best player that I have witnessed, watched live in my lifetime.
So it is remarkable. I watch Shohei Ohtani pretty much every day.
Right.
And it is incredible to watch. Shohei Ohtani, when he hits, you can see people in the dugout are like, what is happening? This guy is an absolute machine. And then you look up at the scoreboard and Aaron Judge is hitting 70 points higher and has 3 more home runs. It's hard to even imagine somebody who's hitting the ball better than Shohei Ohtani, and Judge is doing it.
And I like Shohei Ohtani too. I think he's another just wonderful
ambassador. But we get to watch 2 of the greatest players ever right now. Going head to head. And again, thinking about last World Series and how lucky Major League Baseball was to have the Yankees. And unfortunately for you, Judge wasn't hitting the ball well during those playoffs, but Shohei was hurt as well.
Baseball's a cruel sport.
It is, but it is a really great time to be watching baseball.
It really is. All right. On that note, we're going to put a pin in it. Should be great. Hey, so next week we are going to have we should probably talk about some upcoming housekeeping. Next week I'll be on the Wednesday show, but that Friday I'm starting some vacation time. So Chad and Jay Bell will be sitting in.
I get to be in the main pilot seat on Friday. We're going to see if the O-band bump and the Bell boost just explode plain talk.
We may need to buttress our servers. So that's going to be a lot of fun. But then also after next week, the podcast is going on hiatus for a couple of weeks. We're going to have some reruns and some best ofs. We also recorded a very interesting conversation we had Chad and I were asked to be keynote speakers at the state North Dakota Professional Communicators State Conference. We had a great conversation, lots of great questions. So that'll be one of the, but for a couple of weeks, we're going to go on hiatus, take a little summer break, and then we'll be back at it once again. So that's
Rob, I feel like you should promote the evening with Rob Port that you have coming up.
That's right. I do in Fargo on the 22nd. Prairie Public is hosting an event. It's not called an evening with Rob Port.
An evening with Rob Port.
I will tell you that when they booked me, I thought it was like just like a radio segment, and I'm like, why are they booking this so far ahead? But okay, great, yeah, sure, I'll come on, no problem. And then I realized, like, no, we're doing like a whole hour. It's at an outdoor event. I'm going to be in Fargo. It's really cool. It's at the Craft Event Center. I think that's what it's called.
So, Rob, did you buy a tux, or are you just renting a tux to be an evening with Rob Port?
I'm wearing a t-shirt and a hoodie. Yeah. And Matt just helpfully reminded me that it's also being recorded for TV as well. So now maybe I'm going to rethink the t-shirt and the hoodie.
I think you go with the tuxedo.
You think so? Just show up? How about a tuxedo shirt?
That seems more on brand, if we're being honest.
It is. I am not a dress up kind of guy. But yeah, that'll be a lot of fun. That's coming up Thursday the 22nd. So if you're in Fargo or the Fargo area and watching me talk about politics with the folks from Prairie Public is your thing, you could go to that event. That should be a lot of fun.
An evening with Rob Port.
Yeah, it'll be fun. It should be a lot of fun. But yeah, that's coming up next week as well. So, hey, thank you all for listening. It's been wonderful. We had a wonderful legislative session. We're going to take a little time off coming up here, and then we'll get right back at it as we get into the 2026 election cycle.
Jesus.
Thanks for listening. We'll talk again. That's it for today on Plain Talk, the voice of North Dakota politics. Plain Talk is a production of Forum Communications Company. Got a question, comment, or suggestion? Leave us a voicemail or send us a text message at 701-587-3141. That's 701-587-3141. If you haven't subscribed to Plain Talk yet, you can find us on YouTube or your favorite podcast platform like Spotify or Apple Podcasts. For those of you who are already hooked, give us a rating or review. And don't forget to share or tell a friend. Special thanks to my co-host Chad Oban, and from myself and everyone at Plain Talk, thanks for listening. Woke up at 6 this morning to the sound of my sprinklers going off outside my window, and I'm thinking, you idiot.